factory's dark secret. All right, so this story comes from a guy named Mark. He had a terrifying experience at an old factory where he used to work, and it's something he still can't get out of his mind. Mark wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened to him changed everything. Mark had been working at this factory for a few years. It was one of those big old factories that had been around forever, and it made all sorts of products. The place was huge, with multiple buildings and warehouses spread out over a large area. Most of the time, Mark worked in the main production building, but every now and then he'd be assigned to work in the storage warehouse at the back of the property. This particular warehouse was old and mostly abandoned. It was used to store equipment and materials that the factory didn't use anymore. The place always gave Mark the creeps, but he didn't think much of it. It was just an old, dusty building. One night, Mark was asked to stay late and help inventory some old equipment in the warehouse. He wasn't thrilled about it, but he needed the extra money, so he agreed. He grabbed a flashlight and headed over to the warehouse. The place was even creepier at night. The lights inside were dim, and the shadows seemed to stretch out and move on their own. Mark tried to shake off the feeling of unease and got to work. He started going through the old equipment, checking off items on his list. About an hour into his work, Mark heard a strange noise. It sounded like something scraping against metal. He stopped and listened, but the noise stopped too. He figured it was just the building settling and went back to work. A few minutes later, he heard the noise again, but this time it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from the far end of the warehouse, where the oldest and most unused equipment was stored. Mark's heart started to pound, but he told himself it was nothing and decided to check it out. He walked towards the back of the warehouse, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he got closer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the old, rusty machines had moved. It had been pushed aside, and there was a small, hidden door behind it. Mark had never seen this door before. It was old and covered in rust, with a heavy padlock hanging from it. His curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to see what was behind the door. He found a nearby tool and managed to break the padlock. He pulled the door open, and a rush of cold, musty air hit him. Inside was a small room, filled with old, broken furniture and other junk. The air was thick with dust, and the smell was almost overpowering. As Mark stepped inside, his flashlight beam landed on something that made his stomach drop. In the corner of the room was a makeshift altar covered in strange symbols and candles. There were old photographs pinned to the walls, all of them of people who used to work at the factory. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He recognized some of the faces in the photographs. They were people who had gone missing over the years, people no one had heard from in a long time. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Suddenly, he heard the scraping noise again, this time right behind him. He spun around and saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through him. The figure slowly stepped into the room, and Mark felt a wave of fear wash over him. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said in a raspy voice. "This is a place of darkness." Mark didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran out of the warehouse as fast as he could, not stopping until he was outside and in the safety of the well-lit factory yard. He looked back and saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching him with those hollow eyes. He ran to his supervisor and told him everything. The police were called, and they searched the warehouse, but they didn't find anything. The hidden room was empty, and there were no signs of the altar or the photographs. Mark couldn't believe what had happened. He knew what he had seen, and he knew it wasn't just his imagination. He quit his job at the factory the next day and never looked back. To this day, he still has nightmares about that night and warns anyone who listens to stay away from old, abandoned places. Some places hold dark secrets, and it's better to leave them undisturbed. Mark hopes that by sharing his story, he can help others avoid the same terrifying experience he went through. If you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.